everyone, and welcome to our session today. You are joining us for Paying Global Teams, Strategic Compensation, and Compliant Payroll. We have an incredible panel here for you to really dive into this conversation, share more with you, help educate you on this topic, and leave all of us more informed, more inspired about the importance of payroll from a global perspective than we were when we got here. I am Ben Eubanks. I'll be the moderator for the session today. I'm the Chief Research Officer for Lighthouse Research and Advisory. I'm an author, I'm a speaker, and I love researching and understanding what matters to all of you out there as you're trying to serve your workforce and create a better employee experience across pay, across benefits, and across other topics as we'll go through today. Now, the data tell us that there are real challenges around global payroll. For example, 2 out of 3 leaders that we've talked to in our recent research said that they're not fully sure that they are compliant on all of the regional and local laws in the areas where they're operating, which creates real risk for the business. In addition, we're also seeing that about 40% of companies say they're spending 4 hours or more per employee to onboard, manage, and pay them. That time, that valuable time, is being taken up with a lot of administrative tasks, repetitive things, and it's an opportunity for us to automate, to look at tools that are going to make that easier and streamline the experience for our people as well. So I'd love for all of you to participate in the conversation today. You're not just spectators, you are participants. So please chime in with questions, with comments, stay active. We'll have a poll later on today. I'd love for all of you to make your voice heard because we want to hear from you what matters and what resonates with you as our panelists are sharing. In addition, there will be a report available for you. It will be coming to you via email after the session is done with. It will go deeper into some of the topics. You'll hear additional insights from our speakers, and will help you really have a takeaway that you can share with your team internally to start good conversations about how to create a higher value from your global payroll approach. So today for our panel, we have an incredible group here assembled covering different areas of the global payroll spectrum. Our first up, we have Ian Giles here. He is an incredible leader in the payroll space. He is based in the UK, and he has spent time early in his career in the cinema space. And so he's talking about how to bring that red carpet experience to your employees from a payroll perspective, how to create that great connection there. So Ian, I'm so glad that you're here with us. We also have Menaka here with us. She has a vision that every single employer and every single employee out there will have, an integrated and simplified payroll system when they go global. And that's a key value point that she is really passionate about. And then we have Michael Nierstedt. His perspective on this topic of global payroll, just one of the things that sticks out to me is that he said there's all this opportunity for us to innovate and create more value, both in how employers approach this, but also for the people at the receiving end of that payroll. And he has a big vision for what that looks like. So glad each of you are here. And I'm going to dive into the questions and let's get started here because we have some good takeaways and the time is going to go quickly. So Ian, I'm going to start with you. Of all of the pieces of the HR puzzle that are out there that people will be focusing on, why is payroll so critical?
Thanks, Ben. A pleasure to be here today. We're talking about 2 of my favorite payroll topics, strategy and compliance, and both at the same time. So it's absolutely great for me. So not everybody sees payroll as important, where in fact, it is probably the only one single business function that directly impacts every employee, every single payroll cycle. And there are several reasons that make it so important to me and hopefully to everybody else. So firstly, and I think everybody here today listening, talking can agree, we all rely on getting our wages to cover living expenses. Without that, we're not here. So timely and accurate payroll is essential for maintaining morale and trust. Employees are more likely to stay at an organization that reliably handles their pay, making it accurate as possible. There's lots of surveys out there, some of which quote that 35% of employees would leave an employer if they were paid incorrectly. To me, that's quite frankly a scary number. If that alone isn't a reason to take payroll seriously, I don't know what is. Secondly, payroll plays a leading role in the deduction and the remittance of taxes, ensuring that businesses don't face penalties and legal issues. So payroll's adherence to legislation, overtime rules, and all of those kind of things is really, really important. Thirdly, companies that consistently pay employees accurately build positive reputation, both internally and externally, to everybody that sees who they are and what they're doing. To me, that makes really good business sense. So in short, payroll isn't about just paying employees, it's about building trust, ensuring compliance, and supporting the overall health of an organization.
love that big vision you cast there, not just on the nuts and bolts of the taxes and things, but also that reputation, the trust, those pieces, Ian, that's so critical, and companies can't leave those things to chance. Okay, Menaka,
Isn't it?
so
It's no grey areas at all in payroll. Sorry, no grey areas in payroll. You either get it right or you get it wrong.
okay, so Menaka, we heard from Ian, you either get it right or you get it wrong. What are you hearing that are some of the biggest challenges that companies are facing when it comes to global payroll today?
Yeah. From my experience, Ben, I think I would like to categorize it into three major categories, which is, considered to be the biggest challenge today, is to comply with the local, laws and legislative, regulations in each of the countries. Not only that, within countries, if there are provinces or states, each of these states and provinces in turn have their own rules and regulations. So unless and until we get to that minutest detail, it becomes very difficult for global employers to be compliant in a particular country, right? Right from understanding the employee benefits to what the minimum wage standards need to be adhered to the various tax obligations. Apart from it, another major challenge would be lack of standardization. So it's all fragmented today because the payrolls get outsourced to the local vendors who use different systems, and they follow their own processes. So when it comes to having a centralized view, it becomes a very challenging task, and especially when the companies get audited, then it's even more challenging for those global employers. And to add on to more woes, now if, a global employer might have employees across various countries, and where he'll have to pay employees as per the local currencies, or there are employees who wants a particular payment in a particular currency. So the payment systems are also pretty complex. It also depends upon the infrastructure that each of the banks carry in each of these countries. So I think we can keep on adding this to the list today, Ben, when we talk about the challenges. So unless and until we have a centralized system, a centralized provider, a unified platform, it becomes very difficult for companies to strategize and handle the complexities in a global payroll.
Excellent. I want to come back to that in a moment because you talked about the lack of standardization. It feels like there's some opportunities there to dive deeper. But first, Michael, I want to come to you because part of what Menaka finished there with was the only way we're going to get this done, solve some of these challenges, is having a solution here. And so what are you seeing from a technology trend, a solution side, or thinking about how global payroll teams are trying to meet some of those kind of challenges we just heard about?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because I think one interesting thing is Menaka mentioned the fact that the industry is very fragmented with we call it an aggregator model, where there's these providers in the background running the payrolls in these individual countries. And what's interesting is most of the clients know that that's how it works. And it's a really frustrating aspect, but it's just a fact of life of how global payroll works today. And I think there's a real opportunity to disrupt the market and how it works today. And no one's really done that yet. So that's really one of the big opportunities that we have at Multiplier, is to try to make a more seamless experience that ultimately will lower the cutoff times, because it takes a long time to run payroll today. And that leads to more errors. It gives you less time to make corrections. And that creates more errors down the road. It creates the issues that Ian talked about around people not getting paid correctly. So I think like all of it is tied together. In terms of like other opportunities, though, I would say there's kind of two different problems going on, which is one is the U.S. is shrinking. I think a lot of the developed countries are shrinking population and workforce wise. And so there is a need to globalize our workforces more than ever, and pull employees from new markets. And the problem is a lot of companies are unfamiliar with a lot of the countries they would like to go into, and they need a helping hand, whether it's through EOR or if they plan to have a more permanent presence with global payroll. I think that's a challenge that they're facing. And then the other challenge is companies, as always, wanted reduced costs. And unfortunately, payroll is viewed as a cost center in most companies. I'm sure most people listening to this know that feeling. And I think that you're kind of in charge of this growth initiative that will retain your revenue and help you be productive as a company by hiring people. But then they're also telling you to reduce your costs. And so you're seeing this pressure kind of play out in that they're looking for more consolidation of platforms, more unified experiences where processes can be more automated. And the cases where a single system can't get it done, which is in a lot of cases, what's happening is they really need really strong integrations between these systems so that it can be as seamless as possible for both the admins and for the employees, so that they basically the data is correct in all the systems from a compliance standpoint, and then also from an employee standpoint, they always have visibility into their pay. So I think those are like the main challenges that we're seeing right now from the industry, and you see that reflected in a lot of the surveys you see from global organizations as well.
Yes, that doesn't just create problems at a high level, company level, on that lack of standardization, because it can create different experiences for the employees too. You know, if they're not getting the same set of level of service, the same set of care, the same measure of attention to their focus, because they're in a different country out there. Ian, one of the things that Michael said was there's this perception that payroll is just a cost center. I'd love to hear you respond to that. You sort of gave some indication earlier on how you might respond, but I'd love to hear from you how you might respond if a company said, yeah, it's just a cost center. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's absolutely not. But one of Michael's other points about payroll needing to be as seamless as possible. When you're actually talking about the way that the lots of providers at this moment do have this aggregator model, it eats differently into the SLAs, whether or not that's actually the processing and the paying side of things, or whether or not it's at the other end of it when something has potentially gone wrong. The aggregator model does allow for an extended service level agreement if that is the case. The client, the employee, has a problem, they have to raise a ticket. It comes to the payroll specialist at the provider, who then has to actually ask that question of the aggregator. The aggregator asks the question, it comes back to the payroll specialist, it goes back to the other end of it, and it can extend that process. So trying to actually get all of that to come together is great. And what Michael's talking about is absolutely fantastic. In terms of payroll being a cost center, I think it's a really, really big statement that it is seen as a necessary evil in lots of businesses. And I do get that. If I go back to payroll, when I started doing it, it was 500,000 keystrokes a week in the middle of a dark, dingy room in the corner somewhere that nobody could kind of enter unless they got the secret, knock on the door and all of those kind of things. It's changed dramatically, and payroll, and I talk about it all the time, I believe with the data that payroll has, it is potentially the best strategic asset in a business. If you look at HR data, it's not complete because payroll haven't actually processed it. And if you look at finance data, it's after the fact. Now, when you can get payroll data to as near real time as possible, that is as valuable as you can possibly get as far as I'm concerned.
It is my goal by the end of the conversation today that Ian will teach all of us that secret payroll knock, so we can get that accomplished. Okay, so thank you for that. I think that's a really great segue into the next part of our conversation. Talk about some of the strategy behind payroll, not just a process, a transaction, just hit the button and pay people, but there's so much more that goes into it, the thinking around it, the experience around it, all those things. So Menaka, I want to come to you for this next conversation. I want to shift a little bit and talk about strategic compensation as part of this bigger discussion. So how are you seeing companies approaching salary banding, approaching pay scales when it comes to hiring across regions? Because we all know that living in Hong Kong is different than living in other areas of Asia or other areas of the world where the cost of living could be very different. So how are companies handling that challenge, Menaka?
Talking about the compensation structure, deriving a compensation structure across similar roles, right, across various countries. I mean, it's pretty tough. So we at Multiplier, what we do is we establish region-wise pay bands. So we first consolidate all the similar roles across countries, and then region-wise we arrive at the pay bands. That's one method we follow. And in some of the countries, we also follow the method, like tier 1 cities, tier 2 cities, based on the cost of living. Again, we decide on what is the correct pay scale that would really help an employee to make a decent living. And of course, we also look at the salary range, because that gives us a lot of flexibility and the adaptability to adjust it according to the cost of living in that particular country. So it's a mix and match of this, Ben, as we talk. And not I mean, it could not be a standardized approach. It differs from role to role and country to country. So you know we also consider a lot of these factors while arriving at a salary which could cut across all countries for similar roles.
So your biggest piece of advice really is to be flexible on that, knowing that it can't be just one hard and fast rule, because there are areas of the world where it will break that rule. So being able to be
Absolutely.
flexible on that is your biggest piece of advice. Okay, tremendous.
And
All right.
one other thing I would throw in there with this is, while I do think as a software and service industry, we could be doing a lot better in providing compensation benchmarking to organizations. I think that there's also this, there are tools out there that people can use. There's consulting groups that people can use. I would definitely, if you're really, really lost, which some of our clients can tend to be when they're just entering global markets, it can be really helpful to bring in some salary experts, because you don't want to price yourself out, but you also don't want to overpay and potentially alienate other people in your organization by overcompensating certain regions versus others. So I think this is a case where I would definitely recommend some like, if you're hiring enough people, to make the investment to bring someone in to help you with that.
To know your benchmarks, essentially know what that looks like externally, so that you're good, and internally, as you mentioned, across the inside of the company as well. Good
Yeah,
point.
like, we're fortunate. We have Menaka and lots of operational experts that process lots of payrolls and can see these things, but a lot of these customers coming in may not have as well. They may be a little more lost. So there could be some good players that you can bring in, like Radford and other ones that you could bring in to help with this. Okay,
excellent. So, Michael, I'm going to come to you. Go for it, Ian. What you got?
Just going to say, I know we're kind of like cutting in wherever needed to and editing, but I was just going to say, just on Michael's point, I think that really is important. And if you look with the EU transparency coming into play over the next couple of years or so, it's going to become even more important to get that right. And I think if the world doesn't think that the APAC Transparency Act is going to follow, or the Australasia Pay Transparency Act, I think we're going to end up with a global kind of way to approach this properly, and that is something that businesses, along with the likes of the firms that Michael's mentioned, but consultants, fractional experts, the people are really seriously needing to look at how they are paying people, why they are paying people, and getting it right. It's going to become more important than ever.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm thinking about one of the hazards of that, Michael, and the companies who are doing this, who are growing globally, are often doing it quickly. It's not this very long term. We need this quickly because we've got this key milestone, this key priority, this key objective from the business perspective. And if you just put something out there and we'll change that later, you can't go backwards on pay, not easily, and not without losing good people. So, hey, sorry, we accidentally paid you 20% more than we should have. We're going to reduce it next pay period. You're going to be looking for someone else, like that Ian mentioned earlier on the incorrect payroll.
Good luck.
Probably a higher hit rate on that one.
It's always an interesting thing when someone's pay is corrected. It's like, hey, we realized we underpaid you the last year, so we bumped you up. And they're like, well, are you going to correct all the last? And then they don't ever correct it. So it does create a lot of distrust, confusion. And so, yeah, it's always better to get it right initially. You can always fix it. Like, it's not an unfixable problem, but if you can get it right at first, it's always a lot cheaper and it's a lot easier to deal with.
what I heard earlier on is that everyone needs a Menaka on their team, basically. And if you don't have one, you got to find the right partner externally to get that done. Okay, so Michael, we're talking about comp and some of these other sorts of things. Talk about some other perks in the payroll space, like early wage access, those sorts of things. How are employers using those right now to help drive employee satisfaction and really have an impact and change the nature of payroll from just it's coming at this regular cadence? There's other ways to approach that.
Yeah, I think that I think there's a few different trends going on. I think the ability to reflect total compensation is a really big challenge. Like Netflix is a great example where they, for a long time, didn't give anything but base pay. And so they wouldn't do anything else. And so they could throw a really big number at people. And it worked really well. People didn't really think about what the costs are of benefits and all these other things, or equity, or the value of equity. And so I think like there's an opportunity to better convey what you are giving. A health insurance benefit in the United States is incredibly expensive. And to be able to convey that this thing's costing them $10,000 to $20,000 to provide to you is something that will, I think, create some loyalty. I think it has been proven that it creates some loyalty. Being able to correctly show what equity, and I know most people don't get equity, but in the cases that they do, they're going to be highly leveraged employees. How do you reflect how much that equity is worth? I think we've had a lot of challenges I've seen organizations really challenged with trying to convey that. So I think compensation package is just explaining how they're being compensated is a big piece. But in terms of like unique perks, I think early wage access is probably one of the hot ones right now. It's definitely caught on in the US. I think it's starting to catch on more globally. Technology needs to get a little bit better on how to figure out, similar to what Ian said, how do we figure out in more real time what someone has earned so that we can truly give them what they've earned? Right now, a lot of these systems are based on, I would say, attendance data, which isn't always fully accurate. And so there's some challenges that you may need to think through. Honestly, if you're in the US, try to find an early wage access provider that takes all the risk, because then if they get it wrong, they're going to eat the cost. And I think you can find those players out there that would do that. So I think that's one thing you can do there as well. And then one other area that, is interesting with global is there's employer of record, where you just kind of have to think about, like, how are your benefits and perks going to be different between your kind of regular employees and these employer of record employees? And so it can be really challenging sometimes to get a comparable set of benefits with EOR that you provide to your regular employees, and not having those be equivalent or close to equivalent can create issues with the culture of the company. So it's just something to think about when you're setting up your benefits with an EOR. Are they going to give you the set of benefits that you're going to need to be competitive with the rest of your employee base, so you're not creating these weird disparities? And there's some really other interesting benefits out there as well around fertility and all these other things that are happening, but I think those have lower adoption right now. 529 college saving matches is another one that I've seen some action on, but it's very low adoption in the US. So I think it mostly comes down to retirement, what's your match, the total compensation equity, and then, in countries that don't have private, or that do have privatized healthcare, what health benefits are they providing to their employees? So I think those are the main things you can look at. And then I view early wage access as like an X factor, that if you can get it in a place where you can get high adoption for it, it can have a huge impact. There's been a number of studies that have shown that retention of employees is significantly higher at places with earned wage access than without. So it is kind of a nice bonus, or like a additional thing you can do if it's available in your market.
Yeah, retention and attraction. Some of the data we have on that says that if you're getting an offer from a company that has it as an option, they're substantially similar, you lean more heavily in the favor of a company that's giving you more options on how to get paid, when to get paid, those sorts of things, more control there overall. So Ian, listen, we're casting this big net, right, across all these things. We've heard from Michael a lot of different examples of ways that we're trying to innovate when it comes to the benefits and the pay and the ways we're approaching and caring for the workforce. But at the same time, you and I and the audience often probably has lived this out, where payroll teams are not seen as strategic partners. They're still kind of trying to break through that barrier. What sort of things are you seeing that are limitations there or are barriers to payroll leaders like those in the audience here being seen as contributors in a strategic manner?
It's a great question, and we've kind of like touched on it a little bit before. It's something that all businesses should seriously be thinking about, no matter what the size of them is. So I think many payroll teams face challenges that limit their ability to act strategically in global organizations. Like I said, they're seen as merely operational, behind the scenes function focused on processing payroll whilst ensuring accuracy and leaving little time for broader organizational engagement. And all of that takes away their ability to show their readiness to take a seat at the decision-making table. I've had lots of conversations over the last 12, maybe 16 months about chief payroll officer. And I think that's one step that, that might possibly get payroll taken more seriously. The members of the C-suite might say there are 27 of it already, but in my opinion, we probably need a chief payroll officer more than we need a chief happiness officer, and lots of the other quirky new kind of phrases and names that are out there at the moment. And there are also the organizations who underfund payroll functions. And we kind of talked about that before as well. They consider them as a cost center rather than this strategic asset. A lean team might be sufficient to get the routine tasks done, but it's going to lack the bandwidth to get strategic initiatives and projects off the ground. So that's something that seriously needs to be looked at. On the flip side of it, when in reality, we know, we discussed this as well, payroll's data is what can make them strategic, particularly if it's real time. But the more geographically dispersed a business gets, the more often the data is siloed and not integrated with other systems. That makes it hard to report the data, work from a cross-functional and departmental point of view. Without these advanced tools, payroll teams are going to struggle to translate the data into the actionable insights that are going to add all of that value. I believe, organizations can empower payroll teams by getting the best out of them, by including them in strategic conversations and just carrying on with this theme of payroll sitting in the background. We don't often get brought to the table often enough to kind of help with the decision making. We're there, we're informed, we're communicated when decisions have been made, and we have to action them. Whereas if we had a conversation about the fact that a report was actually produced in Thailand that nobody ever knows about, it's going to break the whole implementation, we could have done something about it. So businesses really need to be looking into the distance, into the future, and implementing fit for the future, not just fit for the now solutions, with analytic tools, with training for payroll teams to provide all of that data, plus business strategy and communication. And I don't think there are enough businesses looking at payroll at this function that really can support them.
I'm thinking about that chief payroll officer concept that you mentioned a minute ago, that role. And one of the things that comes to mind immediately takes that to a higher level, as you were with some of those comments there around including them in the conversation, being proactive, thinking ahead, those sorts of things. So much of payroll is reactive when there's problems and there's challenges, but you're really advocating for, let's be proactive, let's lean in, let's look for ways to partner actively with things that are going on. And there's a book written a couple of years ago called The Power of Moments. And in it, the authors talk about creating these experiences that delight people and connect with them. And the opportunity for payroll there, it's not just, oh, there's a notification, I got my pay slip, I'm going to either check it or not today because I'm busy, but that's it. To looking for ways to really connect with people, create a moment, an experience that makes them smile, that makes them excited to work for this company, reminds them why they were chosen for that role and the value the company sees them playing in the bigger picture. That's the opportunity there. Or, as you said, they can keep it the same as it is. It's just another push a button in the process of payroll, and we'll handle errors when they come up. And they can see them that way, but they're never going to get the most value from their people and from that team who's like, put me in, coach, I'm ready to contribute more, when they give them the opportunity. Good.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I talk about the payroll maturity model a lot, and in my opinion, there are 4 levels of payroll maturity. You have immature, that could be a brand new company or a function that isn't doing what it's supposed to. Then you have immature, they are firefighting, as you say, every single payroll cycle, never improving what they do, have a tax suite that is just absolutely ginormous. Then you moved into control. They're improving every payroll cycle. They're reducing their tech stack and they're working properly. And then you have strategic, a payroll function that is leading the business in terms of direction. And to me, if I look at an implementation and I look at a transformation, I always look at it in terms of benefit realization and what we can do. And I always like to get we would like to do this, but it doesn't really matter if we don't, kind of like topic in there. Can you imagine being that strategic a payroll that your entire team sits on the end of a Zoom call on payday and waits for people to come to them with problems, but never gets them? That to me is success.
Time to go get ice cream, I think. That's the answer to that
Absolutely.
one. Yeah. Have some fun. All right. So, Menaka, I'm going to come back to you because we've heard about some of these big visions here for success, the opportunities to have an impact. And yet we all know that one of the key things that drives focus and attention, both inside the function and from an executive level, is compliance, right? How are we making sure that we're meeting those needs, we're staying compliant? So just to kick us off here, what are some of the big hurdles that companies face when it comes to compliance around global payroll?
Yeah. One of the biggest, hurdles, Ben, would be every country has its own laws and regulations, right? And as I mentioned earlier, now within the country, if it's, further, if there are provinces or states, then each province or each state again has a different set of laws and regulatories to be followed. That's difficult for companies to keep a tab on. And To add on more, if there are any changes to the legislative, the statutory or the legislations or regulations, if there are any changes, then we'll have to keep a tab of those changes and ensure that they are correctly implemented, because there's always a time frame by when those changes need to be implemented in the payroll, and it needs to be implemented, otherwise it might draw huge penalties, right? Moreover, the tax structures in each of the countries are very unique. The contributions, the social security contributions are different in each countries. The reports, um, the reporting standards, everything is different. Like every country has its own set of rules, regulations, legislations, the way they report. Keeping a tab of all that, it's a huge hurdle, and these are very important, to ensure that we run a compliant payroll. And moreover, not only for regular employees, but if there are expats, right, then it makes it even more complicated, because then we'll have to keep a tab on the double treaty agreements between countries and ensure that the employees do not get doubly taxed, which is very, very important. And every country has its own norms that needs to be followed. So unless and until all these are documented and there is a specialized team which monitors this regularly and updates it into the payroll system, it's going to be very difficult to churn out accurate payroll report, right? Um, so not only that, there are different types of it again within the country, amongst various industries, the norms, the regulations differ. That's even more complicated. For example, a manufacturing industry might differ from an ITES or an IT industry, right? There's difference between white collared and blue collared employees. So you take one single country, and there are so many different variations in it. And I think every global employer would face this challenge of keeping a tab of the exact statutories that needs to be followed, the changes to the statutories that needs to be followed. So that's a huge hurdle. Now, unless and until you have a centralized system and you have an exclusive team which keeps a tab on all these laws, rules, regulations, keep updating them in the system, and whenever there are changes, getting them implemented within the defined timelines, it's going to be difficult for companies to manage global payroll. So basically, I think since the teams are completely decentralized, it also becomes difficult for the HR or the finance or the payroll teams to keep a track of all these changing laws across various countries.
I remember years ago when we first started putting employees in other countries, and I had Google alerts set up for like certain things, and it's impossible to do that yourself. Really, it's not easy to do that, and you can't do that yourself. You've got to have a trusted partner to make that go, because I shouldn't have been trusting some automated alert to let me know if our employees that were stationed in the UK or stationed in Saudi Arabia or in other areas of the world were gonna run into issues, and trust that was going to keep me apprised of that. So you do have to keep tabs on that. And again, that's what you and the team spend your time on, making sure that employers that y'all work with are kept up to speed. No one gets surprised by something. No one's get caught flat-footed. Everyone's always ready for those things, not as they happen, but before they happen, so they know what to prepare and all those sorts of things. So really, really good inputs there. And even the industry differences piece gave me a little bit of a pause, because I thought about there are parallels here in the US on certain types of contracts, things like that, where you have to have different benefits for employees based on what the law says. And if you don't know what those are, again, you get caught in a surprise, and not a happy birthday surprise, but a very nasty surprise that comes with a bill attached to it, and fines and all those things. So goodness. So Ian, as you're talking to employers that are trying to solve some of those problems we've heard about from Menaka, what are your tips? What are your strategies for companies that are trying to make sure that they don't get surprised with that firefighting metaphor used earlier? There's no fires to put out because they thought about it in advance.
And sometimes just thinking about it, it's absolutely possible. If we go back to COVID in the UK, we were getting notifications at 5 o'clock in the evening about changes to what we call national insurance, you might call social security, that we had to apply the following day. So everybody was sitting around watching the news for what was about to happen and how we had to change it. And it changed 2 days later, and then something else changed. There were so many changes to payroll legislation in that period of time. I think there was some 20,000 around the world. Absolutely, it's crazy. But in terms of what businesses can do, I think, stopping what you're doing, looking at where you are, taking stock is really important, and imagining where you want to be. I'm a firm believer in simplifying and standardizing wherever possible, not doing things because you always have. That is probably one of the worst phrases in the English language. We've always done it this way. Got to stop doing that. So create global frameworks for processes like payroll, reporting, and auditing, while allowing for the regional customizations that we've been talking about. Implement a clear set of policies that outline company expectations globally. Establish dedicated compliance teams or an officer to ensure alignment with global and and the local regulations, like we're saying. Promote ethical behavior and integrate compliance into the company's core values. Encourage open dialogue. Make sure people are talking about things that they're hearing about. It might not be something that's anything to do with them, but it's going to help the business. Subscribe to regulatory update services, hire legal advisors specializing in international law. We've talked about that as well. Attend industry conferences, join associations, stay informed wherever possible, and partner with the local consultants that we're talking about. Most of all, you can go to all of these external experts, but you need to make sure that your people are trained and you're provided tailored, training to each region, focusing on the key areas that they're going to be working in, like anti-bribery, labor laws, data privacy. And one of the other things that businesses can do is to test themselves, conduct regular audits to help identify gaps that they might have before they come issues. Use those findings to redefine policies, and look at implementing corrective measures. Make sure that you document everything, keep thorough records, agreements, communications in case of any query, audit, or disputes. And finally, and I've kept this bit to the very, very end because I'm a very, very firm believer in simplification and harmonization. Leverage technology, use it to its best ability, track deadlines, flag potential risks, automate repetitive tasks, take away the human element wherever you don't need it.
when you said technology there, Ian, Michael smiled, and I could see you're like speaking his language right there. He was so excited to see that. So Michael, the next question is going to come to you. Ian, that was tremendous, by the way. I want to ask you a quick follow-up before I go to Michael. Actually, you mentioned audits. Is there a regularity or a time frame you recommend there, like a spot check every 6 months, every quarter, what's your recommendation for employers on that piece there?
For me, it would have to be, an element of the payroll at least every quarter. If you leave it every 6 months, I think you're looking for disaster. And in my opinion, the more you are checking on yourself, the easier it's going to make, Big Four audits or external audits, governmental audits, and that kind of stuff. If you can actually give an auditor a file, access to a shared drive, and let them get on with it, it's time you don't need to spend with them whilst you're trying to process the payroll.
Thank you for that. I want to go a little bit deeper there because someone might have had that question. I want to make sure we addressed it. So, Michael, one of the things you said earlier today, you said this is one of the experience is often frustrating because it's been service-based in the past. And I've made a note there when you said that in my own notes here. I said it's like a service versus a tech-enabled service. And I think that's the transition point. So I want to hear from you. For the leaders in the audience who are listening to this, they're hearing some of these strategies and things. We've talked about each of our panelists in different moments, different conversations have mentioned the power of technology here. So what factors should be top of mind when someone is thinking about a payroll provider that's going to help them support global compliance and think about that in a more comprehensive way?
Yeah, so I'll actually start with something that isn't technology at all, but builds on what Ian says, and then I'll get into the technology stuff. So you mentioned about figuring out where you want to go. I think the other piece of this is, unfortunately, today there aren't chief payroll officers. There's usually a CHRO or a CFO that the payroll person's reporting to. You need to figure out how you can align your vision with whoever that person's vision is, because you're not the ultimate decider, which is tough because it's not ideal. But the problem is, if you don't do that, the decision is just going to come down from the top, and then you're just ultimately going to have to veto their decision or not. And that's a lot harder to do than being up front and going, okay, these are my needs, and this is where I'd like to go, and kind of working hand in hand with them. So where I've seen the most successes with implementations is really around making sure the CHRO and the head of payroll are really in lockstep with where they want to go. And then I think from there, there's a lot of things you need to do to make sure you pick the right technology. I think there's a lot of questions you need to ask. The classic thing are called demonstration scripts, but make sure the vendors prove that they can do the things that you need them to do. And then I think the challenge with global sometimes is you may not fully know what the rules are, but I think as Ian mentioned, and as Menaka mentioned, you kind of need to know the rules at least at a high level to know what's possible. If it's not possible in a certain country to pay your employees directly through a local provider, you need to know that, because you're going to have to manage that yourself, right? And you need to know what's possible and what's not possible. But where I usually see people get tripped up are around implementation times, like time it will take to get to the first payroll being ran. So really think about, when do you want to start? What's your goal? So I think that's the first piece. And then after that, it's thinking through, does this thing calculate the things I need it to calculate? Does it make the tax payments and filings I expect? Is it going to support, paying employees in the locations that can pay and automate that for me? And in the ones that can't, can it support me in the ways I need it to? I would also look at customer sentiment. Look at the net promoter scores of these companies. There's a lot of companies with really bad customer sentiment scores. You should challenge these companies if they don't have good customer service, because you're probably going to have a lot of challenges if you run into an issue with them. And then the last thing where I see more things fall apart than anything are integrations. So there's always going to be pieces of your product in payroll that's going to have to integrate with either an HRIS system or a GL system or a time and attendance system or a benefit system or expense system, whatever it is. These are critical integrations. You really should make sure that they're going to work. And you need to go maybe just one level deeper than hearing, oh, they support a NetSuite integration. What does that actually mean? Do they support what I want to do with NetSuite? And so I think that's the biggest place where failure happens and where there's hiccups. And the challenge is if you miss those things, you're likely going to have to live with either a workaround or just a process gap that will have to be addressed manually. So that would be my biggest thing to look at, it, what are those integrations outside of just making sure the core requirements are being met. One other thing I forgot to mention, reporting. If there are audits or reports that you know are a requirement for you to do, just make sure that the client's going to be, or the provider's going to be able to support you in some way to meet those needs. And so those would be my main call outs.
So I've got integrations. Look for those hiccups and holdups because they're going to be there likely, and just expect those. Look for those. The demo scripts, have those things available so you're running through your own process, not through whatever they're putting you through, their assumption about your process, but your actual process. You know where those areas are that it can and can't support, those sorts of things. That brings to mind another question. And Menaka, if you're okay, I want to ask you this one because you've managed payroll over 100 countries globally in your experiences, and you talked earlier about a lack of standardization is often a problem. So we're hearing from Michael about the importance of making sure some of those things are ironed out in those conversations. You're looking for a provider there, but any other inputs you might add for the audience around making sure your data are standardized, making sure that your processes are standardized, anything else you'd add to some of the other conversation you've heard in the last 2 or 3 minutes that might be helpful for the audience?
Ben, so basically, I think we we spoke about the challenges and also the ways to address it. Being a global payroll provider, I think the benefit that we offer on the table is we leverage on the cloud-based solutions, right? And we have a system, a centralized system where while we have configured the system as per the country laws, but then it gives a overall view to the global payroll head or the HR head on what's happening across all countries. It gives a centralized view of the data processed. Not only that, it also gives a centralized dashboard, which helps them tag or see, if all the filings have been done on time, the correct filings have been done. So I think all these informations are available on a centralized platform. So I think as a global payroll provider, we lessen or we try to reduce the transactional activities which otherwise which the global payroll companies might find it difficult to spend time on. So I think talking about the process standardizations also, when if an employer has employees across multiple countries, one of the most biggest challenges that is faced by these employers are also having a standardized system. So especially when they have to collate data or they have to go for an audit, I think the global payroll provider helps in standardizing the payroll processes while adhering to the local country norms. I think that's the biggest benefit that we offer on the table, and I think that is the biggest benefit that a global payroll provider can offer to any of the global employers across the world.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Ian, I want to come to you with a quick question, if you don't mind. So what I loved hearing from Michael a minute ago is he started off with figure out where you want to go, right? There may not be a chief payroll officer, but there is a CHRO. And for the people that are listening, if you are reporting up to that person, here's how you align to their vision. Here's how you get on the same page. I think that was really important. Ian, I want you to do the counterpoint of that. If you're a CHRO or someone's a VP of HR listening to us right now, and they need to set up a conversation to talk to their payroll lead to say, listen, we've been doing it this way. We're going to change. We're going to level this up. We're going to be seen as strategic contributors. Any inputs on how they should lead that conversation and start that off so it really lands?
I think there is no one person that is too big in any organization. I think it's down to having legitimate, upfront and honest conversations involving the right people, not having meetings that are 20, 30, 40 people large, just for the sake of it, but having the right people in there. If you're not going to contribute to a meeting, you probably shouldn't be in it. But if you are operating and doing something that is absolutely imperative to the success of the payroll, you should be included. Goes back to my example about a spreadsheet being, collated in Thailand. That person needs to be involved in the process. Technology aside, I don't think you can have or spend enough time on discovery and due diligence when you are trying to actually transform payroll. And to me, it is all about having those right conversations. It's better to have a difficult conversation at the right point in time than 24 hours before you're about to go live and it not go live.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I think the audience also as well, for those, again, when Michael said it earlier, I'm like, okay, there's probably a good mix of those people listening into us. I want to make sure we covered both of those. And so y'all, no one here has any excuse for not having that conversation as soon as you're done here to make sure everyone's aligned and on the same page. I think that's so critical. So goodness, so we're, as fast as it's gone today, we're closing on our session. We've got about 10 minutes left. And so I'm going to go through, we've heard today on compliance, really good advice on how to think about that at a global perspective and think about it down to the local or even industry level. As Menaka pointed out, this can be very, very complicated, very complex, and you can't take for granted that you've got that taken care of, because the second you do, as you heard from Ian, things can change quickly and surprise us, and we don't want to get caught there. What about product features? What that means, what things you should be looking for, what areas of focus, things like compensation, really thinking through that strategically, thinking about early wage access, like Michael took us through, some of those sorts of things that you need to think about to take pay to a little bit higher level and a different perspective. We also heard about payroll systems, some of the thoughts about how to select one, how to look at those technologies, how to vet the ones that can actually meet your needs, which ones are going to scale up to the complexity that Ian and Menaka have talked about, and some of the things that are really, really critical for you to know when it comes to that. So we want to leave all of you with some actionable insights. So I'm going to go through each of our guests here, each of our panelists, and ask them a couple of questions, or ask them one question each to wrap us up and give us one good takeaway. And to the panelists, you're welcome to either double down on something you've shared earlier and say, this is my biggest takeaway, you have to go do this. Or it could be something we haven't talked about yet that you want to make sure you leave the audience with before they go back and get to work on some of the things we've shared. So Menaka, if you're okay, I'm going to start off with you. What is one closing piece of advice you'd give to the audience out there to help them level up?
Well, yeah, I think global payroll is equal to a centralized. I mean, it needs to have a centralized system to run it efficiently and effectively. I mean, and also, the validations that come along with it, because that plays a major role. No matter how much a system is automated, but then I think unless and until we have the right validating factors, we cannot ensure to churn out an accurate payroll. So I think that's one of the key takeaways.
Thank you so much. Ian, I'd love to hear from you. What's yours?
The one piece of advice I would give to payroll teams aiming to level up is probably embrace automation and analytics. If you can streamline processes with tools that automate repetitive tasks, you're winning. If you can reduce the amount of time you spend tracking time, tax calculations, and compliance checks, then absolutely great. It also reduces the possibility of human error and free up time to get to the strategic, the value-adding stuff that we've been talking about. If you prepare that, if you pair it with the analytics side of things to gain insights into payroll trends like overtime or benefits take up, and that's not something that we've really mentioned as well, being able to see what your employees are actually taking up means you can actually change things. Let's not just do what we're doing for the sake of it. If you know that X percentage of your employee or headcount is wanting pet insurance, look at that for something. If in a different country they're wanting more health benefits, this kind of information is where it is, payroll is where it is going to come from. And it also gives the payroll team the empowerment and the knowledge that what they are doing is valuable. And, I've worked in some large payrolls, 100,000 people per payroll cycle. You do not get 100,000 thank yous every single payroll cycle. You get the 5, the 6, the 10 complaints about something being wrong. Payroll needs to feel valued.
Goodness, I think I want to applaud that one. I wish we could have 30 more minutes to go through some of that too, like collecting data that inform decisions, right? Really using that to drive the right actions and so on. Goodness, you saved some of the best pieces for last, Ian. Thank you. Michael, anything you would like to share with the audience as your key takeaway?
Yeah, I would go back to something and then add one other kind of additional point to it. So, kind of what Ian said and what I said too, think about where you want to be and then work backwards from there into digestible milestones and try to figure out how you're going to get there, because it's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of buy-in and convincing from the organization. Because even though I think many execs, if you told them, are people a big part of our company, they would say yes. When it comes down to brass tacks and money part of it, usually it gets deprioritized. You're going to have to make a very convincing argument on why you need to greatly advance your kind of HR position and how you deal with HR and pay within your organization. So that's one piece. But the other piece I want to just call out is there are so many times where I see these strategies get built and they almost never talk about the customer, which is the employee. So just when you're really building out these experiences, think about what's that employee, what's that user experience going to be like? I think not to pick on Workday, but Workday's gotten a lot of criticism about their recruiting experience and how you always have to have a new login every time you apply for a job. They've Business Insider wrote about this, and that's a really frustrating experience. And there's a reason why an admin would want that from a data perspective, and an organization will want that, but the users are being kind of forgotten about. And we've done that a lot historically in payroll too. And I think we just need to make sure as we build these better experiences that we're always thinking about how can we pay these employees the most accurate, the most expedient way? How can we get them access to the money they earned as quickly as we can? And so that's the only other piece of advice as you're building these strategies. Think about how can you improve that experience for your workers at your company.
Thank you, Michael, for that last nugget of wisdom from you. And if I had to sort of wrap this up myself, the thing that I've heard and has come up so many times is we talked about the technical nature of payroll, the systems, the tools, the data, all those sorts of things. But you all out there listening in have probably heard these other pieces that keep resurfacing. It's about the interaction, the trust, the value we give our people, what they get from us, and ultimately how we make them feel. Do we make them feel appreciated? Do we make them feel like, oh, this pays incidental thing, or this is how we're reminding you that you have value to us as an organization? That's one of the key things to top of minds. I'm working on the next book that I'm writing, which is all around payroll. So it's kind of fun to tie that one right in there. So I'm going to close with a quick poll question for all of you out there. So take a second, weigh in, let us know what your thoughts are on this. So the poll question is, what is the biggest challenge your organization faces in managing global payroll? Is it ensuring compliance with local regulations? We heard about that today, definitely. Managing payroll across multiple systems, trying to make all those things talk together. Is it aligning comp strategies across different regions of the world, because those can vary greatly, as we heard from Menaka? Is it providing employees with equitable benefits and experiences that make them feel valued? Sort of touched on that just a little bit ago. Or is it 5? Is it all the above? The last answer there. So let your voice be heard. Go ahead and weigh in there. We love hearing from all of you in these polls. It's a chance for you to make sure your perspective is a part of this bigger conversation today, just like all of the questions and all of the chat as well. Thank you all so much for spending some time with us. And don't forget, there'll be a report coming to all of you on global payroll to help you get into the weeds of this, really dive in deeper, share this with your teams, help you start good conversations like we've heard from the team today, and really take this from idea to action is our best hope for you from the information you received today. Thank you to my amazing set of panelists. Thank you to the Multiplier team for pulling us all together. And thank you all for the good work you're doing in payroll every single day. We appreciate you for spending some time with us out of your day, and hope you have a good rest of the day.